Good late Tuesday, early Wednesday meteorologist Casey Cloud here in the Weather Center right now, giving you a look at the Doppler technology across the region. Really not any soured in the land areas here right now, so kind of a departure. We had that moisture around last weekend. I know on that Saturday we had over 3 inches of rain here to the east of Stark. Some flooding even across parts of the county here. We had that tornado warning up into Duval County. Not really seeing anything come of that, but still, just always important to be mindful here of the overall meteorological scenarios here as we're looking and as we're tracking things. I know that general thunderstorm risk there on the board for that Wednesday, but you see the storm acting right now, at least in the coastal waters. You do see the temperatures, and that's a story. We've seen some cooler air by a few degrees try to get in, a little bit drier. That's really temporary, though, as you saw in the description maybe of the video here. I know we're actually east of Stark right now, more rural area, more open per se. We're at 67 degrees, so that is nice. I know it's in the middle of the night, but still, that is some pretty nice, cool air coming on in here as we're tracking things, as we're looking at things here. You see a little bit warmer to where like Tallahassee, 71, 73 Gainesville, but definitely some cooler air in Georgia. You see there up in some of those areas, 69 Homerville, and even getting further up into South Georgia, 67. See 66 northwest to Albany, 64 there around southwest Georgia. So that's some pretty nice air, but fairly short-lived here, unfortunately. They're going to have some more storms on the way, so that's going to be, something we'll be tracking as we zoom out here. As we look at our maps, nothing too noteworthy as we're tracking things. I know we actually had a dust storm in Arizona that Monday evening. That was a pretty big deal. You see some tropical interest they're maybe trying to get toward California, but it's a tropical storm right now, Juliet, in the Pacific, but it really should fizzle before it gets there. Maybe some extra moisture out in the southwest, but not really expected to hold together as we're looking ahead in the timeline. In the Atlantic here we have Fernan, and that's moving way off toward the northeast. So it's really quiet here compared to the last several years. As of, late August, we're looking pretty good right now, but you never know. I mean, that don't only last, about a week, and that the models, after that, showing a clear picture for at least that long. It's actually a little longer right now, but really can't trust them past a week. As you're looking, as you're tracking things. So who knows? We still gotta have this hurricane kits up to date. Things can change here really rapidly. Gotta just be remaining vigilant, obviously, here. Things can just take that quick turn, obviously. But let me go ahead and show you the graphics here. They're looking as we're tracking things in toward the weather center. You can see Fernan out there in the Atlantic, and not concerned about that. Nothing else showing up for the next 7 days, at least in the outlook. We had an area we were watching Invest 99 now, but that's not a concern here anymore based on what we're seeing with the model guidance. So that's some good news. And then you see our names here, Fernan. That's, up there now. We had Aaron crossed off. We still have a roof current risk towards some of those local beaches. Got to still remain aware of that. But, not as bad as it was. But just, that's still something to be aware of. And just in general, in case, something else evolves, we still have, really about 3 more months left of hurricane season. It's just important to have your hurricane kit up to date. You just never know, really. As you see here, the peak of the season around September 10th. But you just always got to remain alert. And, now, something I'm about to say I've been working very hard on the next graphic. This is taking a good bit to put together, but it's something I've been wanting to do for a while here, and we finally have it in graphical form. And, there's not a lot going on right now. This was a good time to get this together with how active we've been, because this is a very interesting graphic here, I would say. It's document every county within our 62. It's worse based on my assessment of things, which it's obviously subjective, but the worst tropical cyclone by county since 1950. So this is a very interesting thing, because you look and you see, well, where's Idalia? Well, Helene kind of took over many of those areas and some more even from what, Idalia's land area would have been in terms of it being the worst since 1950. And then you think of, well, the 04 season, Charlie, Francis, and Jean. Well, Matthew ended up being worse for Flagler than Charlie, but it was pretty close between Charlie and Matthew there. And then Francis and Jean probably would have been on here before, the last 2 seasons with Helene and Idalia. Before that, Irma, before Irma, I think we would have had some areas here on here too, though. We still have Bradford and Union, Putnam, Dora. It's the storm here of, really the benchmark as we're looking here and as we're tracking things since 1950. And if you go back further, 1898, southeast Georgia got hit very hard by a hurricane. And that would have probably been on here for many of these areas if you went that far back. But you kind of have limited data points on especially lesser storms, and it starts to get iffy. So I didn't want to go further back, and we're kind of trying to get into the storms that people, that, are a little bit getting up there towards their 70s or so. I mean, remember, if we get up to the 1800s, nobody's going to be around from then, obviously. So, you also got to think here. And look, I know we had storms that went, across there on the Gulf Coast there, going back, in the 1800s that were very significant toward like Bradford County. That accident, at least there's one of them there, the Cedar Key hurricane, I think. That one definitely would have been up there for a lot of these areas, including Bradford, at worse than Dora. That was in the 1800s. So the point is here, just going back to 1950 or so, as we're tracking Bradford County storm of reference here, that benchmark, the worst one, obviously there are some folks that are still around that were born before 1950, but these are kind of, it gives you an idea, and just based on the record we have, kind of the worst storms in living memory for these areas here at this point. Obviously some, storm acts in the 30s to 40s, maybe even the 20s, as we're getting back here, some folks may remember, but as we're looking there. But this is just a good graphic here to try to get a hand on the worst storm, really in living memory here, just in a good broad brush. So as you're looking here, as we're tracking, you see Matthew for Flagler. Talked about, Tardo is pretty close, but, folks called that, storm of reference for them down toward, Flagler Beach and the like. Remember we had Ian, and we had other storms, that caused some impacts there. Nicole, and just Irma had an impact to some degree there. Just a bunch of different storms you can make points for, but Matthew came out as the worst one. Again, some of these areas, you had about as bad as you can get. Other areas, there's room for a much worse impact than these that are on the map, to be quite honest, depending on what county you're in, as we're tracking things. So, as you're looking here, you see Dora for St. John. That's where it made landfall, obviously, in 64. George Winterland guiding folks through that. He gave folks the heads up that it didn't look like it was going to turn this way. The late George Winterland, and still after all these years, 10 counties in our area out of the 62, is still the storm of reference, the benchmark storm, really. As we're looking at things, you see, I did put David there for Glenn County. Glenn County, as we talked about in the 1800s, 1898 hurricane was much worse than Dora or David for that area there in southeast Georgia. It was catastrophic, even Nassau County as well. But going to since 1950, it was bad, but it can be, a lot worse even than the storm of reference here, going back to last, 70, 75 years or so, as we're looking and as we're tracking things. But as you see, toward Brantley and Pierce and Helene last year, look at how many counties Helene has here, folks. That really stands out. And I will say, it's a tricky thing about this, Helene, because it wasn't like, Duval County, or some of the bigger populated areas. It kind of, really didn't stay in the headlines. We had Milton not that long after that was impacting really populated areas. Helene didn't stay in the headlines as long. Helene still had that surge along the Gulf Coast, even further down. But, it didn't impact as bad, as it did areas that are less populated generally. Obviously, there's still a lot of folks out there toward Perry and Valdosta and Waycross, but it wasn't Jacksonville, Tallahassee as bad as it could have been, Gainesville, St. Augustine. You kind of get the idea. Now, one that might be a little bit controversial, if you read about it, it really isn't, but Hurricane Easy in 1950, Levy, I know it's kind of tricky. We could have said from 1951 with this list, and then I just had already said 1950 is where I wanted to go, and this storm in 1950, Hurricane Easy for Levy County. Despite Helene and Idalia being so bad down there in Levy County, I went with Hurricane Easy because if you look back, it made loops around there as a very significant hurricane, and we're talking about feet. Some estimates there And now it's not all maybe official, but maybe 50 inches of rain in some areas down there from that storm. 50 inches. So, I mean, that's just extraordinary. The storm kind of went on and it went around and it just kept, being a problem there for that area. Kind of like Harvey was, in Texas, but it was more about Levy County than anywhere else around here. It was kind of like, Levy County's Hurricane Harvey was with all the flooding with 50 inches of rain. So that's why easy still, since, even though Helene and Idalia were really bad, it was worse like in Horseshoe Beach and the like, for, the impacts based on where the landfall was. So I just felt easy. 1950s Hurricane Easy was the worst one there. Irma was pretty bad in Bradford County, but it wasn't as bad as Dora. But Irma, I felt, just based on where Dora went across, Irma was the worst storm there for Alachua and Marion here going back, the last, 75 years or so. But as we're looking at things, as we're tracking, you see Kate still, after all these threats for Tallahassee. Michael was bad, Helene was bad, Idalia was bad, but Kate was worse. Based on everything I've looked at, I mean, really, after the tornadic accident last May, folks said Tallahassee's, worst weather event was those tornadoes there last May, since Kate in 85. And if Helene would have went just a little bit further west, Helene would have taken the top, the top mark there per se, the number one slot for Leon County. But it didn't end up working out that way, thankfully. And we're glad about that because Kate was very bad. That was like November. It was something impacting folks around Thanksgiving, all the way up into Cairo and Thomasville and Moultrie, up to Tipton. It went across as a hurricane based on the records as well. So a very impactful situation. Michael was terrible around Panama City, but still bad in a lot of our western counties. I know, as we're looking, as before we did cloud weather really officially, but we were updating folks on Twitter there at Cloud Casey. And then you have Alberta, 94, was a month before I was born there, had my paternal grandmother there impacted by that one very significantly with a tropical storm, along with Kate, really, both of those should have been retired, especially Alberta in 94, because that flooding event was just absolutely catastrophic. And we're talking about just whole towns there, just with devastation from flooding there along the Flint River. I mean, you're talking about Baker County, Georgia, for instance, just a catastrophic scenario, with just many feet of water coming on in there. And, Dougherty County, we had, deadly scenario there, obviously. So, just an awful, awful situation as we're looking there. So, 9 different storms out of our 62 counties. I mean, about a third of the counties. Last year, Helene, I mean, try not to have a recency bias here, but I went through everything. We had fatality there in southeast Georgia, I believe, with, the emergency personnel trying to get out there, and just absolutely terrible with that. As we get further west, I mean, it was just terrible in parts of, Lowndes County there with that impact. I mean, it's crazy because before Helene, if we'd have done this graphic last year this time, Idalia would have been in a lot of these spots instead, for the last, many decades. The year before that, it would have been a lot harder, actually, probably, to do this graphic, because it wouldn't have been as obvious for some of these places, but you probably would have had some of those 04 storms, maybe Irma, a little bit bigger area in here, too. That would have been really kind of, tricky, because a lot of the areas had really been overdue, and unfortunately, it wasn't this one. We thought after Idalia, okay, you had that one, it was terrible, but it can't get worse. And then with Helene, it got worse, just remarkably in a terrible way. Just absolutely just awful for so many folks there. I mean, if you think about what happened, the power outages in South Georgia, I mean, around Douglas, Georgia, for instance, just such a terrible impact, with our 62 counties there, about a third of them with Helene, just the worst one, at least since 1950, as we're looking at things. And then, these are also our counties that we cover for tornado warning storms. They're on with that one for Duval on Saturday. We hadn't really had one of those pop-up, spin-up warnings in a while, and we had it on Saturday. We got on within just about 3 minutes, about as quick as you can get on for a random tornado warning like that. We had that flooded risk around Bradford, and we were watching that, posting about that. talked about that during the update, but we were on that tornado warning for due that radar indicated rotation, 95, 92, 95. Of course, tropical systems spin up tornadoes. I mean, this is, again, all really, relative and really subjective. I mean, there's a lot of storms are really bad in some areas. Other areas have really got spared more so over the decades, and they could be really, really overdue for something much worse than the impact that a certain county's got. I mean, speak of tornadoes. I mean, I think of the Bonnie tornado in the 404 in Duval County. That was terrible. We had, that impact areas in Northwest Jacksonville so bad. I mean, you think of Faye, there, all the flooding in 2008. There's just so many storms. Debbie in 2012. So many areas being impacted there, obviously, as we're looking across the region. I mean, you just have to be really, really mindful here. We had Debbie last year. It wasn't as bad generally, but we had that flooding out there toward the Swanee River Valley, for instance. We had, Milton was pretty bad in Flagler County last year. It goes on and on. We could spend all night doing this. But the point is, this is the worst. This is kind of the storm of reference, the storm, I would say most, all the storms people talk about in a county, these would be the ones that people would talk about as being the worst, most often, based on all the records, based on all the data. Again, subjective. Some folks, well, maybe their house was hit a lot worse than Idalia because it knocked down all the trees, and Helene didn't have that many to knock down. I mean, as bad as that sounds, I mean, Idalia, and Helene, they were both terrible. Helene being quite a bit stronger, but some folks say, and, it's not really the funnest thing to have to say, but I remember after Helene last year, some folks say Idalia did them a favor by getting out the weaker trees, so it helped a little bit with the cleanup process from Helene. Not a lot, but maybe a little bit. As you're looking, it's crazy to even talk about it like that, but that's probably the storyline. Again, this is a graphic. I'm going to probably be showing a whole bunch here, next weeks to come, just, as we're getting toward that peak of the season, just so folks kind of have an idea here. This is something that took a lot of time to work on here in the Weather Center, and it's worth talking about. If we ever have, maybe we'll get a lucky and not have anything, come close to Helene or Idalia or any of these for a long time. But if we have a storm coming, this is a graphic I can just change some of these areas on and say, well, if the track and the forecast hold, then we're going to have a new storm record for certain areas. Let's hope that doesn't happen. But under those areas, on Bradford, where we're at, that's why I highlighted in yellow, by the way. That's where we're at in Bradford. That's where we're based at. But, as we're tracking things here, Bradford probably really overdue for something. For instance, Duval County, I mean, these, almost pretty bad in Duval, don't get me wrong. It was Bradford as well, but it wasn't as bad as Dora based on everything. I mean, we had the center go right across Bradford. Dora really caused storm surge problems in Duval. I mean, obviously St. John's there were hit. It's the graphic that I'll be able to just change here. Let's hope it doesn't really happen like this because we don't need to do it. Maybe we'll, keep getting lucky the rest of the season. We're way overdue for most, of us to really get lucky and just kind of get a break from this action. But Dora there, I can change the name to, this time, soon or something like that. A storm of major impact could be coming. Right now, not so much. That's good. We're not seeing anything in the tropics, not anything at all. Nothing to turn the logo red for sure. I mean, we're not seeing nothing in the tropics right now. Maybe something way, east out in the basin eventually. As we're looking here, that gets out a couple weeks-ish, and if we return the logo red, it'd be for the local stuff, because we do have concern for the games here, the high school and college games this weekend. Rainfall, just the overall pattern, getting some of that cool air come in, and then we have this pesky storm accent kind of lingering around, which, we really, don't want to see impacting those games here and the like, as we're tracking things. Just the boundary here hanging around, and, some areas have had drought concern, but, locally most of the areas are kind of past that for now. I mean, we can use rain at some spots, but other spots you really don't want the rain at this point. I know clutter.com/radar gives an interactive look at things. You see South Florida maybe more rain than other spots. I know, we'll be watching though for all those different college games. I mean, I see South Florida in here, and I think of that Miami Notre Dame game Sunday night. And we don't have a graphic in here for that yet, or, I mean, I don't think I'll put a graphic in here for that one, since that's not an area. We may end up putting a graphic in there for the Florida game this weekend. It's one of those games against lesser opponent, not like Florida State, Alabama, where I already have the graphic in here. And South Florida, definitely a decent chance of rain, unfortunately, on that Sunday. We'll have concern around Gainesville on that Saturday as well as high school games Friday. As we talked about last week, some areas will get lucky. You'll be pretty good. Other areas, not so much. So just wait and see on that. As we look here, though, this is the college football forecast for the week 1 game there. Number 8 Alabama Crimson Tide of the Florida State Seminoles Saturday at 3:30 on ABC. It's in Tallahassee, the renovated Doak Campbell Stadium at Bobby Bowden Field. I know he won't be there for this necessarily, but Lee Corso there, his final college game day will be happening that day. Prestigious FSU alum there. It'll be up in Columbus, Ohio, and he'll be putting on the headgear for the final time. So big day in college football all the way around with that huge game, Ohio State and Texas up there. And he's 90 years old. Wishing him happy retirement. Obviously, what a great career. I mean, he's been broadcasting about 40 years or so, Lee Corso. As you look at this game, though, I don't know if it's going to be a game that goes too well for my Seminoles there. This is something where the team really still, I just don't know. I mean, I will say the weather could help them a little because they're going to be more of a running offense here this year. The new quarterback coming in there from Boston College, that offense there with the offensive coordinator, Gus Malzahn, is more designed about, running there and, not throwing as deep, maybe shorter throws there. As we're tracking things. So this weather, star quarterback on the other side there for Alabama, the highly talented quarterback there coming on in. I mean, he's been there, but now it's his time to shine for the Crimson Tide, obviously. I mean, I feel like, the weather, if it is adverse, it might kind of make the game closer because I feel like otherwise Alabama's going to win by a lot. I mean, I'm a Seminole fan saying this. And this does not mean anything about the playoff, obviously. What happened in 23 as we're looking at things there. I mean, because it's whole different teams. I mean, different coach for Alabama all the way around. But that quarterback, Ty Simpson, for Alabama, he, based on everything I've seen and heard, I mean, you don't really know yet until the games get going. But, it's supposed to be a real star there for Alabama. And it's going to be, I mean, it's in Tallahassee. The crowd will be a factor. The weather, there will be too. The weather could be an equalizer here. It's possible because if not, I think Alabama wins by 20 plus points. I mean, this isn't 2023. Florida State would have won. We've talked about that so many times on here. Florida State would have beat Alabama easily, but everything's just falling apart for FSU, to be quite honest. Since then, FSU football, there's not, I know the portal can help some, but there's not a magic solution, fix things when you win all your games and get left out of the playoffs. I mean, it pretty much just, it tears everything apart. And I don't know what, if anything, it's going to really fix things for a while unless you can just get some different makers, because the recruiting rankings really haven't been that good. But I mean, it's hard to, any coach, it's hard to tell them players, well, we won all of our games, and well, we didn't go to the playoffs. Nobody thought we were good enough, so our season ended then and there on selection day. We did everything, and it didn't mean anything. Really, I mean, won the ACC championship, but it was pretty much told it didn't mean anything. So, when LSU, the team they beat by a whole bunch, their quarterback won the Heisman. So, as we're tracking things, and Florida State beat LSU by more than Alabama did. And Alabama had that game at home. Alabama barely beat USF that year. I could go on and on. They lost to Texas, by double digits. I believe it was. I believe that was a home game for Alabama even. So, I mean, there's just so much. You can go on and on about that. But that was then. This is now. Alabama's one of the top teams in the country. I know they did struggle some last year, quite honestly. Kalen DeBoer's first year. But, I mean, they got a new offensive coordinator now that's worked with that coach and Ryan Grubb. And I don't see, Mike Norvell's squad really, unless the weather really plays a role. I don't think it's going to be close. I mean, the weather, I think it, will. if maybe it'll be rainy and then you don't have the lightning, but if you have the lightning, we could have hours of delays. That's not off the table here. You got to bring that poncho here as we're looking and as we're tracking things. I mean, you got to bring that poncho because maybe we'll get lucky and have the lightning, but then you're unlucky with the rain. You play through it, then help FSU maybe be a lot closer game because Gus Malzahn has had success against Alabama over the years with his offense, but it's not Nick Saban on the other side anymore. So, I mean, it's just going to be really tough. I mean, I don't, I feel like FSU could lose by a whole bunch again if the weather, let's just say we end up having big lightning delay and then the weather cleared out. That can lead to just a huge 3-4 touchdown win by Alabama. To be quite honest, but if they have maybe the rain around there, instead of having the lightning, and it's just kind of rainy all game, well, then, the running offense for FSU, it could be a lot closer. Maybe FSU, is right there at the end. Still don't think they would win. Probably lose by about like 10 points or something. But anyway, if lightning delays the finish of the game past about 7:50, the game maybe moved off ABC, the ABC network, and the local affiliates in favor to start number 9 LSU at number 4 Clemson, where the weather looks pretty good for that one. That's a huge game Saturday night. Obviously, both of those teams right in the running for the playoff. As we're looking at all that, FSU's really not. I mean, obviously it's not like it was before because there's 12 teams instead of 4. But if FSU loses more than this game non-conference, so it didn't mean as much as a conference game either in the grand scheme. Because if you win the conference, you're probably in. But as we're looking, but if FSU loses more than 2 games this year, and this is it's tricky because of it's kind of hard to say it like that, actually, because the SEC, if they'll say they lose to Florida and Alabama, well, if they win the rest of the conference games, they're in a conference title game and they win, they're probably in the playoff. But, it's tricky there. I see FSU losing a lot of games this year, to be quite honest. I didn't feel good about them last year. I didn't want to say too much after everything they went through with the playoff. But now it's just, a lot of the coaches got fired. It's just a mess, to be quite honest. It's just I don't know what's gonna fix things there. It's it's unfortunate for my alma mater there. Go Noles, of course, but as we're looking, 75% chance of rain. As we're tracking things there, it's gonna be again one of those games there where the weather could play a big role, and again, lightning could be a big factor there, obviously, as we're looking at all of that. So. Let's go ahead and see that college football playoff. My current projections, of course, this is before the year really gets going. We did have Iowa State play last week. This is very subjective, very, very early, because most of the teams haven't played. Who knows? Obviously, this is where I'm thinking teams would be, based on what I'm kind of thinking will happen. You never really know. But I have Texas as the SEC champ number 1. They may lose to Ohio State this weekend, but they'd be in the playoff as well. Penn State there, number 2 again. The regular season, some of these games, Ohio State, Texas, huge game, top 3 in the rankings, but really, then when you think about it, one team could lose by 50 and still be in the playoffs. It's a lot different now than it was. Ohio State lost 2 games last year, lost the Michigan game, then their rival, they lost the Oregon game, it didn't mean anything. They didn't even make the conference title game, and they won the national title. So, the regular season, some teams, it means a lot every game. Trying like an Iowa State or somebody like that, and I don't know why, Tulane, where I have them in here, Arizona State, but some of the other teams, they can lose 2 or 3 games, and they'll be in. So you can see your first teams out: Miami, LSU, Georgia Tech, South Carolina. I think Georgia Tech, that's the team I want to talk about because their quarterback Haynes Keene's been impressive. Tough game against Colorado this week, maybe compared to the rest of their schedule. ACC's pretty weak now. Even if it wasn't as weak as people thought it was a couple years ago, well, now everybody's going to the Big Ten and SEC because, well, that's where, the playoff spots are. That's where everybody says you gotta go to the playoffs. That's where everybody's going to go. So as we go ahead and see another extended forecast, you can see 30% chance of rain on this Wednesday, 40% on that Thursday. The rain chances going up 60-70% there toward the weekend. So. Yeah, could even have some stronger storms around. So, as we're looking at, it just depends. The models have, indicated here there'll be some just rain, but then other points, not so much this rain. You have instability, and it could have some stronger storms in there, but we'll be watching, we'll be tracking all of this Labor Day weekend. Definitely have moisture around. May start to see it dry up a little by Tuesday. The models are kind of split on that. Though Monday, Tuesday, some models are showing a good bit of rain still. Some are not so much. So, rain chance for Labor Day on Tuesday may go down a little bit as we're looking, as we're tracking things here in toward the weather center. So we'll be watching all of that here, obviously, for you. We'll have another update late Thursday or late Friday here. We're watching those football game forecasts. Those are big events, whether, the teams are any good or not. I mean, you think of, I think this is where FSU is headed, to be quite honest, kind of like how Nebraska is, since, they've so successful in the 90s, and then it kind of, just fell off. And that's where FSU kind of is now. So even if there's a big crowd, it's a big deal. Got to be safe, obviously, and the like. The outcome is probably not going to go FSU's way as we're looking at things. And, the thing is, if they lose, well, then everybody will say, it matters a lot. If they win, they'll say, well, look at the LSU game 2 years ago. They won by a whole bunch in Orlando, and then, they won every game and they didn't go to the playoffs. So as we're looking, as we're tracking things here, 89 on that Friday, 85 on that Saturday here. As we're looking, you see that, cloud covered and moisture around. One model, American model, I was looking at, did have a little more on Friday. I might have to rain chance for those high school games. That wouldn't be good for that, obviously, as we're looking at things, as we're tracking things here in toward the weather center. So we'll keep our eyes on all this here for you. There's advertised, obviously, a little above that now, next couple of days, but it is a little drier, the lows below average. We're down to about 66, 67 right now here east of Stark. That's pretty nice as we're looking here. Some rural areas, this counts for the beaches as well, which are going to be a little bit warmer. So you got to keep that all in mind. So that's going to go ahead and probably pretty much wrap it up here for tonight as we're looking there. See, that lightning off the coast. We have the boundary there, and we're going to be watching more moisture come back into play here as we're looking toward the weekend, though, unfortunately. So that's going to do it. Let me see if there's any questions or comments from any of the viewers at home as we're looking at things, as we're tracking things here. We're going to go ahead and just check. Don't see anything. I appreciate everybody tuning in. I know we're always, on Facebook there, KC Cloud Everyday X, Cloud Weather, Twitter /X at Cloud KC, YouTube at Cloud Weather, Twitch Cloud Weather, and Cloud.com, and all the links, including the interactive radar. Watch out for the current still at the area beaches. So keep that in mind. Just have a great night. We'll be back late Thursday or late Friday, unless we just pop back in earlier with any, urgent weather concerns. Have a great night.